Good morning, family. Welcome back again to Karating. It's another wonderful morning that we are going to walk through some of the construction sites that we have around. And today I'm going to speak from a layman's experience, from a returnee's experience, talking about the few things that I've learned about construction projects specifically in the village. Now, as I do that, I'm going to walk you through our latest construction project, which is my cousin's home. I'm going to show you a few things here and there on it. But while we are walking through that site, I'm going to share with you some very specific nuggets that I've learned about conducting building projects in the village. Now, some of you may already know that the village presents a very unique environment when it comes to building and construction, especially when you're constructing a project from a diaspora. So there's lots of issues we could talk about, from planning to architectural works, permits, site prep, materials, personnel, and all kinds of things. But as you know, 10 minutes is not enough to cover all of that. So in this two-part series, I'm going to specifically draw comparisons between what it means to build in the village compared to what it means to build in the city. Now, all the construction projects I've been a part of have been largely in the village. And so, again, as I always share, these are very specific experiences that relate to me and my friends. It is highly likely that what you have experienced is different, but I hope you're going to learn something from my experience. Now, there are about maybe 15 things that I would say are very unique to building in the village. Number one is that labor is generally cheaper compared to the cost of labor in the city. And I'll explain what that means at the end. Because what I want to really focus on is what we have done to address some of the challenges associated with building in the village. So yes, labor is cheap. Number two, some materials actually are fairly cheap in the village, depending on where the village is located. For example, if your village has a big river next to where the construction project is, it's likely that sand will be affordable. Now, if you're next to a quarry, then maybe foundation stones and things like that might be cheaper in the village. Now, the flip side of it too is that there's certain things that are going to be expensive because a lot of them are sourced from the city, especially when you talk about fittings and works that happen after the main structure is done. So those are some realities that you have to navigate while building in the village. And then transportation logistics are also fairly unique, in part because compared to the city, village roads can be seasonal, as some people describe it. And so it's highly likely that you'll run into a scenario where folks who are bringing materials to you get stuck somewhere. That's more likely to happen in the village as opposed to the city. Now, next is that more likely you're going to find a need for feeding your fundis. And I say this because in the village, the tradition of feeding employees is more common than you'd find in the cities. For the most part, in the cities, people do what in French we call kujipanga. And that simply means that folks organize themselves around meals and all that. And then in the village, a lot of employees have a preference for being paid per day. And that has its pros and cons that I'm going to address later on. Number 7, it's more likely that you will be working with relatives, whether as direct employees or as supervisors and things like that, as compared to the city where the pool of employees is much wider. In the village, your options might be limited. And at the end, I'll share how to get around that too. Now, besides that, many construction projects also are more likely to occur in places where materials are likely to be sold. For example, if you are building next to, let's say, see these drinks that Jesus made 2,000 years ago. In the village, we have such places where people manufacture Jesus type of drinks. And so those then typically accept payments in kind. And so if you're building next to one of those places, more likely the materials coming out of your site will go directly to those places. And so that's something to keep an eye on. Now, in the village, superstition may play a role into what happens at your site. For example, if you're building a structure that is slightly unusual, you might hear folks say that it's likely that you are part of the Illuminati, and all kinds of superstition that I'll talk about later. And then there are certain cultural norms about building that may influence your construction. For example, if you're male, then you're more likely to get ancestral land, and there'll be directions as to where and how you build. Females may not get that opportunity in many cases. Also, keep in mind that there are exceptions. So there are certain cultural norms you're going to have to think about if you're going to construct a home in the village versus constructing a home in the city. And then many building sites tend to account for grave sites, because in the village we bury people in their own property. And so when you're factoring in how to build, what to build, and how to put it in, you're going to need to think about that possibility that there may be a grave site within that property. And then chances are, if you're building in the village, depending on how far you're from the city, chances are that you may not be connected to city services like sewerage, garbage, water, power, and things like that. And there's ways to get around it. And then number 13, it's more likely that you will have a very unique relationship with your neighbors, who are often organized around clans. Remember, in the village, you'll have folks who have been a part of each other's lives for centuries. And that's maybe different than in the city. And so there's history in there that you may not be aware of. Things like roads that may not be on the map that may go right through your land. And so even in some cases, there are people who don't believe that trespassing is a thing in some villages. So we'll talk about how to get around that. And then, of course, the issue of permits. In the city, and as well as the village, yes, they require permits for permanent homes. But the reality is, when it comes to permits, especially in the village, it's more about city folks who are coming to collect, but they could not care less what you're building. So that said, how do you account for these unique peculiarities when you're building in the village? Number one, remember, the cheap labor often means that you're going to get low quality work. So we often recommend that you hire folks who have some city work experiences. Now, there are exceptions. Like, for example, the building you're looking at was actually built by a village fundi or mason who did an exceptional job. I'm just really awed by the quality of work that these folks have done for my cousin. So in general, we hire experts from the city with a little bit of some work that we offer to villagers. Now, when it comes to materials, be sure to purchase in bulk from the city. Number three, many other hardwares actually have WhatsApp numbers. So get the numbers, compare prices, and there's lots you can do virtually without having to travel. Number four, personally, I don't recommend having to feed people at work because the logistics can be really wild. Now, folks can do whatever works for them, but for me, it's not worked. I strongly advise against paying folks per day in the village, because when you do that, they have no incentive to get work done on time. And so work that can actually be done in 2 days can be stretched out for 2 weeks, and then it becomes wildly expensive. So if you're building in the village, to the extent possible, avoid pay per day type of work. So what we typically do, we discuss a project, we agree on the cost of the whole project. And so if they do it in 2 days, they get the same money. If they do it in 10 months, it's the same amount of money. So that often gets folks moving and doing things right on time. And then next, be careful involving relatives. Almost 99% of the time, folks have worked with relatives, something goes wrong. Ours was simply an exception. My family has been beyond exceptional in running our projects because we are often building from offsite. So my mom, my dad, my brothers, my sisters have been beyond amazing. But almost every single person I've talked to who involved relatives have been offered a high quality amount of dust. So I always advise to minimize the involvement of relatives in projects away. And then next, the Illuminati and superstition stuff, I take it in jest and often tell them, hey, if you think it's Illuminati, hey, why don't we find the forms and fill it so that everybody can join in and do the same thing? I don't pay too much attention to that, but some people get bothered by that. Don't let it get to you. And now, when it comes to cultural norms, my position, this is my personal position, is that I say apply what makes the most sense in time and place. There's lots of traditions that are excellent, mean no harm, you can do them. But others really don't make sense. There's some rules that were specifically put in place to prevent people without power from thriving. And so I often recommend that you do what seems to make the most sense in time and place. Well, I hope you enjoyed this, and I will finish the last part in the next video. Thank you so much for joining us. See you in the next.